You're listening to the Why That Work podcast presented by StoryBrand.ai. If you've ever wondered why certain brands, trends, or cultural phenomena find success while others don't, you're in the right place. Every week we unpack why something worked, then give you actionable insights that you can use in your own life. Now let's dive in with your hosts, Donald Miller and Kyle Reed.
On today's show, we have two very important and special guests who are in studio with us, joining us, discussing an important topic about dadding. And when Dave Barnes isn't towing tourist vehicles from the front of his driveway, or Jon McLaughlin isn't on his private jet, they host a podcast called Dadville. Now, I'm not going to try to compete with their brag sheet to introduce them, but I'm just going to say, guys, welcome in to the Why That Worked podcast.
Thank you for having us.
I'd love to set the context. Tell us a little bit about you guys, your families. I know you have kids, you're married. Give a little context to why we asked you guys to discuss this important topic.
Yeah, we're wondering, actually. We were hoping you could unfold that.
Well, I introduced you as
get
special and important. So.
We are here to get answers. Thank you, John.
Yeah, we don't give answers. Yes, we are. So we've known each other, Dave and I, through music. We both are musicians. We met 20-some years ago. And then about 10 years ago, we found ourselves living right across the street from each other here in Nashville, Tennessee. We found ourselves with wives. We found ourselves with kids.
This is a Talking Heads song.
Well, it feels like a cult, actually.
We may
now.
find ourselves.
Where did I get
Well, I found myself with the wife.
Where did I get this beautiful
days go by, dreaming on the moon.
And our kids, Dave has 3, I have 2. They like stair-step in age perfectly. And we just found ourselves living lives together and doing this dad thing, and we would constantly be sitting on each other's porches talking about our kids and talking
with
about
each
our
other.
life.
I wouldn't sit on his. Well, sometimes I'd sit on by myself and just
any iteration
think
of that
about parenting
happened
by myself.
We were young, and one day Dave was like, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast called Dadville?" And I was like, "Let's do it."
And it has blown up.
It
Well,
has blown up, depending on your definition of what blown up means. Boy, has it blown up.
It is everywhere. Again, depending on what your definition of everywhere is.
Dozens of
Where?
Dozens, just
all across the
Yeah.
states.
Yeah. It's been fun. Genuinely, like John said, we literally live across the street from each other. And so, being involved in each other's lives and knowing each other's kids, and there's already such a simpatico there that's already happening. So it's a pretty natural outflowing of that,
Yeah.
which works.
Yeah.
And so, Don, when we were talking about having these guys on, you kind of led with a really interesting topic. You want to set that up for the day? And then
Yeah, well, we're a
jump into
messaging podcast, so
Yeah.
we usually talk about like why Airbnb's new messaging works and
Oh, wow.
that sort of thing. That's
Really
our
cool.
angle. And I thought, man, it'd be really fun to kind of take a little bit of a left turn and actually just talk about messaging as a dad.
Mhm.
Like what are the critical messages that you've got to communicate?
Well, I'll say this quickly, Don. Something that Al Andrews, our dear friend, told me really early on, who ran Porter's Call here in Nashville.
Yeah.
as
It's a
y'all know.
therapy place.
Yeah, but I asked Al before I got married. I was like, Annie and I were engaged, and I said, do you have any wisdom for me? And he was like, Dave, I'll tell you this. He said, let's take a test sample of like 100 couples, just for a nice round number, that I meet with that are having a problem. He said, I always meet with the man first. And he said, probably 90% of the time, I don't need to meet with the woman.
Wow.
And,
What's his reasoning for that?
Well, I just think, this is how I think of it. I think, men are the weather, women are the weather vane.
Hmm.
So, and it's not that women can't cause problems. It's not that women can't be problematic at all. We all are. But I do think in a marital context that what Al was saying that I really do believe is like men are kind of the determiners of a lot of things. And I think women are responders to a lot of things. And I think
In
that's
general. Yeah,
absolutely.
there are
in general.
anomalies all over the
Anomalies
place.
all over the place. But to his point, 90%. So, it's not like
Yeah.
all the time, but
Mhm.
but he would say definitely the majority of that. And so it was a call to me to just kind of realize that, like, in those moments, I'm like, what is her deal? That's not the right question. And so then the question is, hey, how are we? What's happened? And early in my marriage, it was laughable how many times that I was like, why is she so mad? Or why is she distant? Or what? That she would say, do you remember yesterday when you said this thing? It really hurt. And I was like, oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
it was me not being a good leader. It's not me being a good husband, a steward of this relationship. So I do think, and I think that's very true of kids too, in that I just think dads, I think to your point, Donald, our culture has really, it's that Brian Regan bit about, the dad being lost in the window thing and he can't get out in the commercial, and the mom's like shrugging. She's like, there's old Jim, but well, I don't know where I am. It's our culture's really sort of adopted this idea of like the everybody loves Raymond thing, where the dad's sort of the aloof, sort of like doesn't know what he's doing, and the mom's like the sort of like,
it's a message that sells.
It's a message
it's a
that
narrative
sells.
that sells sitcoms.
It does. And I think,
what would you say the harm of that? What does that message has done to our culture?
I think dads can take the easy way out because it's expected.
Feels like that.
I just think we don't have to rise to the occasion. And moms, we had when Morgan came on the show, she was talking about mental load. She read this book on it, and it was just so interesting to see how much women bear mental load. She talked about men too. It's not at all exclusive to women, but I think the point is, your question, which is such a great question, Kyle. It's we've sort of normalized this idea that like men just handle work and women handle kind of everything else. And I think
anything that men do outside of work
is just
so
my
praised.
look at you. You have what a dad. I mean, John has this hysterical story about actually you should tell this because it's funny.
This was early on in the podcast. I mean, maybe the first episode. It had just happened before we had recorded like our very first episode. And this is when my girls were young, and so I had the double stroller, and I'm pushing it up Belmont Boulevard to meet Amy, my wife, for coffee. And I'm just pushing my kids up the street.
That's it.
If you take anything, like take one step back, I'm doing nothing. I mean, I'm just pushing my kids up the street. And this woman is walking past me, and she stops me. And she says, "You are such a great dad." I kid you not.
That's the bar.
Yeah.
And my first reaction was not
These aren't my
what
kids.
I'm saying right now.
Stolen these kids.
You don't even know that these are my kids. My first reaction was not like, that's funny. I'm not doing it. I walked past. I was like, I am a great kid.
Yes.
Thank you. People don't thank me enough. It wasn't until, other conversations with
The
people. and
expectations are
I'm
very
like,
low.
It's
Yeah.
extremely
she would have
low.
never probably, I'm assuming, if my wife were pushing our girls up the street to meet me for coffee, I don't think that woman would have stopped and been like, gosh, you were such a good mom.
Yeah.
Amy would have been confused. Like,
Right.
why are you saying that to me?
Yeah.
But men, just for doing the bare minimum, get praised,
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
praise is great, but it's like,
Yeah.
it's a double standard for sure.
And with that bar so low, what kind of motivates you guys to not just stay there? Like if it's that quote unquote easy to just kind of be looked on as good, what pushes you forward beyond just pushing your kids up this, the hill to be a good dad? What's kind of that driver to go, to what Don said earlier, kind of that the leader of the home? What is that for you guys?
I think, and again, Don, you're right. We've had so many guests. John and I always laugh that the podcast is really just a selfish pursuit. I mean, it's to sit with these people who just have such great stories and wisdom and expertise. It's just absolutely selfish ambition with John and I. But I think when you see families where a dad is just really, really plugged in and is present and is leading and is sacrificial and is servant-hearted, the dynamic is just like the craziest thing to see. It's like something done at a level that it's just like the greenhouse is overflowing with growth. The kids are, wonderful kids. The wife is a loving, supportive wife, whatever. And it's just really, you just can't deny that dynamic. It's just so powerful. Yeah. And it's something that John and I are both borderline obsessed with. It's just like, what is that? What is that dynamic? And consistently, I think it's just dads who exhibit those qualities and are really, just do all those things, which is a lot of things, but it takes a lot of work. And so I think there's a call in those moments for those men to kind of go like, hey, I actually have pretty high standards for myself here. I don't just want to bring home the bacon or whatever. I really want to be plugged in, and I want to give guidance, and I want to know. I mean, I watched this video, I almost posted it on our Dadville channel, but it was one of the most heartbreaking things. One, because it terrified me, but it was this Instagram video where this guy's going around with a mic, and he's somewhere in LA, near downtown LA, and he's just asking dads, obvious dads, because they're walking, like, hey, did you see this video? It broke my heart, made me laugh, and terrified me. And he just says, okay, so his daughter, yeah, and like it's real interviews, like these are not staged. He's like, all right, can you tell me the name of her teacher? And the dad, man. And then he's like, what's her favorite subject? And he's like, go, bro. Shoot. And one of them, he's like, what grade is she in? And he's like, oh, honey, sixth. Okay, shoot. And I think one thing, it's terrifying. 2, it's hysterical. But 3, it's this thing that's like, there's a point. I mean, quick side story. I went in, this happened to me. I walked to my kids' school a couple years ago. And Annie told me, will you go in and get, because one of our kids was sick. So she said, will you go in and get the homework? So this is a true story. I walk in and I walk into the class, none of the kids are in there. It's like right before school. And I walk in and the teacher, and in the moment I walked in, I was like, uh-oh. Because she's looking at me like, kind of, oh, hey. Not like, oh, hey, Dave, what do you need? It was like, oh, what a pleasant surprise. And I knew in that moment, this is not the right class. And so she literally looks at me. She's like, Dave, what's going on? It's like, oh, just here to get Santa's homework. And she's like, oh, so I had her last year. And I was like, I know. Just like, but what's up with you? Like, where are you at today? How you coming in? You good? I mean, and she literally was like, she's next door. I was like, all right, well, I'm
Nate
going to
Bargatze literally has a bit.
Right.
Oh, I mean,
Have you seen this bit?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Where he's like, have you seen the bit where they call him? The school calls him.
Yes.
The bit ends with, all right. What's the name of the school? He's got to go down.
So I just think there's something to that.
Did you guys experience the thing? All of us have had this. Before we had a kid, my competency level as a husband felt very high. I mean, lots of vision, good provision, building a house, building a company, making sure we do date night, we go on vacations. And I mean, when, very clear who the man in charge is. And then we brought home that kid.
Oh, man.
And I knew nothing.
I know.
Yeah.
And she knew everything.
Mm-hmm.
And everything she knew was more important than anything
That's well said.
that I knew, because this is a life that's going to die if we don't feed the life. This is here's how you, and all of a sudden I'm the sous chef.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
I'm the sous chef in the kitchen. And by the way, not a good one.
Yeah.
Like, don't know how to, you call this lukewarm? This is what you would call lukewarm?
That's not the right formula,
Yeah.
Don.
It was like, did you sanitize? What
Is
do you
this
want?
coffee
Do you want her to
made?
get sick?
Yeah.
Do you want?
Yeah.
What?
I
I'm like,
totally
yes, ma'am.
remember.
Yes, chef. Yes, chef.
I remember looking at Amy when Luca, our first, was born, and feeling exactly what you're describing and being so grateful. Like,
That somebody
thinking
did.
like, thank God she's here.
Yeah.
She is totally in charge, and I'm like, I'll do. Just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
I'll do it poorly. Let's go.
And I think
That also speaks to how good of a human being you are. That's not the experience that I had. The experience I had was like,
Okay, well, you can cut that.
suck at this.
don't misunderstand. I think we would still
what
resonate with
I'm
that.
doing.
Well, and too, I think to that point, I think something that is okay, and I think this is something you have to hold in tension with wanting to be a dad and contribute in the ways a dad contributes to a family, is that, for a lot of families like ours, like Annie runs our house. Like, she runs the house. She should run the house. She wants to run the house. Like, so there's not a competition of me coming in and going, everything in my purview is my domain. My house is my domain. That's a fool's errand. Plus, she's just better at it. She's more equipped to do it. She knows things I don't know. I mean, to John's point, not just factually, but maternally, she knows things. And so I think, too, there's a space you have to hold while wanting to care for, be a good dad, is also realizing, like, hey, the way I serve here is just to serve. And I'll tell you, I have a whole TED Talk on this dilemma with men, which is, I think one of the reasons that we can work so much, if I dare say it, or stay at the office so much, is because when we come home, we are servants. We're not.
Well, you
running
migrate
business
toward the areas in which you are competent.
And I think for a man,
and there has to be. This is the thing that happened during that season. It was probably about a year in of me just kind of being the assistant, not even like the assistant who's involved in decision making, just the assistant.
Right.
It's handed
Just
to you.
Yeah, this
They're
is
the
just,
orders.
we don't need you
Intern.
to understand why this matters.
Just do it.
And I'm not exactly. I don't think you know your place, Mr. Miller.
Oh, I know
This is
that
not-
feeling so well.
And I made a decision. Look, this
Private
is
Miller.
not. Yeah, this is not going to happen. This is that I am going to be important, and in this ecosystem, while doing exactly what you said, being the servant, because you're not going to compete.
Yeah.
You give me a break.
Yeah.
And I remember interviewing Pete Carroll years ago, and he was Seattle Seahawks coach, and we talked about this a little bit in the interview. And he said, "My wife runs the empire."
Yeah.
He goes, "I fund it.
Mm-hmm.
My wife runs it."
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
also said something really interesting.
Yeah.
I said, when you partner with your wife and blah blah blah, and he stopped. And he goes, "My wife and I do not partner."
Mm.
He goes, "We're one."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Dude, but you like, man, she's a lucky woman."
Yeah. Yeah.
But that feels very true. That the business area is my domain.
Mhm.
This is where I'm
Yeah.
running this thing.
Yeah.
And the home is sort of hers, and she runs it unbelievably
Yeah.
well. And it's kind of an honor to serve in that
Yeah.
environment. But what I had to do was actually break it down and okay, what can I do what are the rules for me as a dad that one, makes sure I don't mess this thing up, and two, sort of serves the ecosystem. And those things were a vision. Like I actually had to sit down and say, here's the vision
Yeah.
for our family. Because Betsy even said this. She said, women think about family from the time they're babies. I mean, my 3.5-year-old already pretends to be a mom and
Yeah.
you know, changes a diaper
Yeah.
for a little thing. You know, and guys don't tend to think about it. But she said what's amazing is very few women actually have a vision for their family. They just know how to do it. And so for me to say, well, here's what we're going to do. Our home is going to be a place of hospitality. We're going to get away for a couple weeks every year. Weekends belong to the family, even though we run a bed and breakfast essentially. Weekends belong to the family. I'm home by 5 o'clock. Dad never raises his voice.
Wow.
Period. You are not allowed to raise your voice in this house. And as soon as I set down some rules, which were really kind of silly, to be honest with you, just be a good person is all it really was. But at the same time, all of a sudden I felt like, okay, yes, I am the assistant, but an extremely important one. And that helped a lot. That it helped a lot for me to feel like I'm contributing.
Yeah,
You know?
and I don't think it's about like I think there are places for a dad in that ecosystem that are still hugely important. I think it can't be misconstrued that like mom runs the empire is like, when any of us come home, it's just to be a Sherpa, a kid Sherpa, or whatever, which is a big part of it. We still play this hugely important role. I think it's just in that setting, knowing, hey, in fact, I was terrified when y'all sent this copy over about like, what's the one phrase your kids would think? I was terrified to ask them because I knew what they were going to say. It's like, I don't know, ask mom. Because I'm like, and my kids will sort of roll their eyes when I'm like, hey, kids, mom is calling the shots on this stuff. Now, certain stuff I will, but when it comes to like logistics or if we can do that with this thing, I don't know, because mom's looking at the calendar closer than I am for the day now. But if we want to talk about other things, like, I can answer that question, or I can tell you what, whatever. Yeah. But I think it's realizing, and again, I just think to give dads who are listening a lot of grace, but encouragement and maybe a little nudge. That thing that is so hard for you is hard for all of us, which is you go from the kingdom that you run, which is your career, and you have control over. Snicker. You come into a space where you're not that anymore. And it's supposed to be humbling. It's supposed to be hard. And that's okay. Because I think a lot of men, I was laughing with a really good friend of mine this a couple of years ago. I was like, why do you think you work so late? And he's like, well, if we're being honest, because it's hard to go home. And I was like, that's okay. It's okay to say that. It is. Like, because you're no longer, hey, look, my company and my thing and my music, whatever. And all of a sudden somebody's like, hey, can you grab this, move that? Can you take them? And I think you have to have this posture of like, hey, I'm just here to help. And I laughed so hard. A friend of mine had just had his 3rd kid last year. He called me and I was like, how's it going? He's like, man, this year has just about killed me because it's the first year where I'm not really getting to do what I want to do anymore. And I see that that's different for every dad. Like some dad, it takes 1 kid and they die that death. Some it's 3. But I remember so acutely the moment that I was like, oh yeah, I'm just here to help. Like, so those, I'm going to go run off. Hey, can I do that? It's like, nah, that's not what I do anymore. And I literally come home, and then when I walk in, I go, hey, what are we doing? What can I do? Where am I taking the kids? She's like, all right, you got it. And I'm like, great. It's no longer like, well, I was wanting to get a run in at 3, or like, can I just pop? Like for now in my family, that's not what I do anymore. I'm just there to help. And it's crazy to hear myself, as selfish as I am, say to Annie, like, what am I doing today? What am I doing this afternoon? She'll be like, all right, this. I'm like, great, cool.
If you don't communicate clearly, all your emails, your website, social media posts, everything you're communicating will be ignored. StoryBrand.ai is like the world's best communication expert writing it for you. Imagine having the world's best communicator writing your tagline. Just type in the name of your company, answer a few prompts, and voila. Hey, that's a good one. Use it to write your social media posts, website wireframe, emails, lead generating PDF, product or service descriptions, anything you need for your business. What would happen to your revenue if every word that left your business was crystal clear and worth paying attention to? StoryBrand.ai is your competitive advantage, so you'll say it clearly. Try it right now and let us write your custom tagline for free at StoryBrand.ai. And now back to the show.
Let's get back to just like core messages. I'm curious as to, words create worlds. The words that you say build the future. Everything that we see that exists was built. Even if you go back to like the Bible, right? It was spoken into existence, which I think is metaphorically true about all of us. We speak things into existence, and we speak self-esteem into our wives and into our daughters and our sons, these sorts of things. I'm curious, in all your interviews and just practically, what are the things that the messages that you guys keep coming back to as dads that build health and positivity in your homes?
Right now, lately, I would say my girls are 12 and almost 10. I'm learning that the way that I communicate with our girls is slightly different than what I thought it was going to be. Like, coming into being a dad, I thought there will be these moments where, they'll look a myriad of different ways, but like there'll be these moments where like X and Y will happen, and then the family will look to me. And I will, and I don't feel like, we don't have to go down to this rabbit trail. Maybe it's just semantics. I don't feel like I'm the leader of the house. This is just Amy, and I don't view it that way. But I think like there will be these moments where my kids will look to me. I will say something
with your shirt off.
The shirt will be off.
Yeah.
And I'll say something, and those are the moments where I need to nail it. Like, those are the times like I need to get myself, all wisdomed up so that I can pass on this wisdom.
Hashtag wisdom.
Ironic that I would say it in that way too. And I have realized, I'm in a season where I'm realizing like how I'm communicating to my daughters is not through what I'm saying. Every now and then, maybe they will hold on to something that I say, and I think I need to say less. Like, once you're on your 5th sentence, they're not listening anymore. That's you needed to stop 4 sentences ago.
Yeah.
But they're watching how I'm treating my wife. They're watching what my relationship is with work and all that kind of stuff. They're watching my daily behavior, and every now and then they will say something. Like, my 9-year-old will say something about Amy and my relationship, or another couple's relationship that we see regularly. They will make these such astute observations of things that we have never directly communicated to them, and they're right on it. And so I've been realizing, not only just what do I want to communicate, but just how it's getting through to them is not exactly how I thought it was going to be.
It's that, which John and I hear a lot, it's that caught, not taught idea, how much of their life. I'll tell you one thing, John and I'll say for me that John and I talk a lot about on Dadville, and it's probably one of the most poignant things that I keep coming back to is this idea, and I'm pretty sure Stephen James said this, who's a very wise person, but Stephen said, you can only take your kids as far as you've gone yourself. on sort of like your own work and stuff, which that I don't love the language of that sometimes. Like, what's your work? How's your work? I'm working on me. That's all good, whatever. But I do think that's really true. And I think when I see hiccups that I've had, or I've seen friends with their parents, or whatever, so much of it is because a kid is speaking a language the parent is not well versed in. And the disconnect is the kid goes, hey, I've noticed this thing about you and it's hard. And the parent goes, I don't do that. And then it's like that conversation's over because they do it and they don't know they do it. And so I think what's so important and me and John really talk about this a lot, just off camera or whatever, in our relationship with our kids, is like, we just really want to be able, one of my goals as a parent, because my kids are going to have problems with me and hopefully they'll come to me about those things, is when they say, hey, you didn't pay a lot of attention all the time, or you were a little checked out at moments, for me to say, I know that. I know. Thank you for saying that. Like, that's in my locker. That is something I struggle with, and I'm sorry you had to deal with that. And not like, you don't know me, or like disrespectful, kid. Like, I don't do that. I'm like super dad. But instead to have the work done, you can go like, yeah, I have this stuff like that I really struggle with, and obviously you were front row to that.
I noticed that years and years ago. I think I wrote about it in a book, but there were some adult kids, kids of men that I knew who'd become adults, who were just exceptionally more healthy than most other human beings. Paul Young's kids, we know Paul, wrote The Shack, and a guy named Jon McMurray, whose kids are actually coming to stay at the guest house here pretty soon. The family that I lived with, John was sort of a theologian that I lived with for a while. And I just noticed that as their kids grew up, they were just freaking healthy. And I actually did a little deep dive into it and talked to Paul and talked to John and was like, what is it? Because I lived with John. He just seemed like a normal dude. And if you know Paul, he's kind of a normal guy. And both of them had done something really interesting. And it's anecdotal, but I attribute the health of their children to this. In terms of a message that you deliver to your kids, they both had sat their children down in one-on-one situations, intentionally to have a conversation in which they apologized for the ways that they knew they had messed their kids up. Things like, I want you to understand you get your temper from me. I want you to understand that, because your mother and I had a tough few years, you grew up with some instability and insecurity there in terms of where you were going to, whether or not you were safe. And this is where I saw it. I'm wanting to know how that has affected you. And, and that conversation, I actually talked to their kids about it. And, how was that? And they would say that looking back, it was sort of a moment when they were set free from being entrapped by that. And it was also, that flaw in them was not completely their fault. So the shame of that flaw also went away.
The
burden of it.
The burden of
the
it.
carrying of it.
That's right. And also imagine the security when the being that provides your food and shelter is wanting to connect more than wanting to be right. And the amount of security that you would get from that, the ego that goes away in that situation. I would say one of the messages that I think all of us need to consider is the message, I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh.
And even be formulating it and figuring out, I knew when my daughter was born, but before she came into the world, I already knew one of the I'm sorries. And it's, I'm sorry for daydreaming and being in my own mind when we were together, because it probably made you feel like you weren't important and you weren't interesting. And as your father, I made you feel that way 1,000 times. I want to apologize. It's just that I have a ferocious imagination, and I like, I'm a writer. I go into these situations. It wasn't you. And I remember at about 2.5 years old, my daughter and I would sit there and I would say, and I realized she's actually lost in daydreaming. And I'm like, I'm off the hook. This is actually,
she's like me.
She's like me. And, but that, all joking aside, that's a conversation we will have to have. And I hope that she realizes at that point, oh, I'm not uninteresting. And also, I deserved better,
Yeah.
according to my.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
My dad.
there's two things I think about. One is, can you imagine a more secure feeling in a kid than to know that their caregiver is self-aware?
Yeah.
So
Right,
I'm not bringing
right.
you surprises about yourself, because if I know things about you, you don't, I'm not safe. That means like we're vulnerable in some way, or
Yeah,
you're
that's
vulnerable in ways that don't make me feel safe. So I need to know, like, you know these things. And if I can say, I know those things, they're like,
Mhm.
oh, thank you. Well, it takes the burden off.
And you also want your kids to trust their intuition, and their
Yeah,
intuition
yeah.
is
It's
on.
fun.
Yeah.
I mean, they know.
Yeah.
There's
They're-
nobody that
Right.
is more front
You're
row
not
in your
tricking them.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're constantly dismissing some of their
Yeah.
accusations, then they're like, oh, maybe I'm not. Maybe
Yeah.
my intuition isn't right.
And I think too, which again, John and I hear a lot on the podcast, that I think we both do, and me and Annie really, it is top 3 important things to Annie and I in our parenting is to apologize, like, consistently.
To each other.
And well, and to the
And to the
kids,
kids, yeah.
because I think, man, if you really want to have some fascinating conversations with your friends like your age, is like, ask them if their parents ever apologized. And that, and I'm not blaming that generation at all. They've had their own things that were handed down from the greatest generation, which was great, but whatever, I digress. But, you know, it's not a very common thing. And
Yeah.
I think to be able, which we started with our kids because we mess up a lot, we've had to grab them and say, like, hey,
Yeah.
buddy, like, I'm so sorry I raised my voice at you earlier today.
Yeah.
And do you forgive me? And have them say, I forgive you. Because it's like, this needs to be a pattern in our relationship, because I'm going to let you down. But what makes them feel secure, and the great, ironic, beautiful thing is, they see that you're aware.
Mm-hmm.
And so they go, oh, then you know you did that.
Yeah.
Which they, thank God, in the ages we are, they still forgive us, and they're still kind, you know?
Totally.
Oh, well,
and I
you
can,
know.
that's going to end. I
I-
think they
yeah.
will.
I don't
think
either.
They're
I
gonna
don't
forgive you in
either,
their
yeah.
20s.
No, and I
Yeah.
can underscore that with kind of growing up. You know, my dad was always the big, we're going to pull the family together and talk about problems.
Yeah.
The one thing he never did was own his own problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the strain in our relationship even today that's a big one.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Is that
tough.
side, and I learned that. I moved to defensiveness really quick because I can find
Yeah.
all the reasons why I did the thing I did, or I'm justified in it. But that importance of owning it,
Yeah.
and then the importance of your kid knowing. So I have a 7-year-old daughter, and she's just like me, and I can see myself in her.
Yeah.
And so I drive her to school every day, and so we talk about, hey, remember when like I grabbed the wrong shoes and you kind of had a little freak out? I remember that. I
Yeah.
remember being like that. And we've been talking about that and dialoguing. And a funny story was she, well, it's funny to me. I tried to like have a little code word with her of like, when you're kind of losing it, like this helped me, you know? And so she's like, okay, we'll do that. And then later that night, it was bath time. I was like, all right, come on, you know, she's, you know, freaking out. And so I said the word, and she goes, Dad, I don't want to play that game. I'm not going to play that game anymore.
Man, I've been there.
I hate this game. And so I just laughed.
No.
But you know, one of the things I just, as you guys are talking, and everybody here has different stages their kids are at, or in life, or growing up. What would you guys say would be one of the most important messages you want your kids to hear or know from you?
I mean, it's so cliche. And for a while, we're on 200 something episodes for I don't know how many, 150 episodes or whatever. We would end our podcast with the same couple questions, and one of them is what's the one thing you want your kids to know? And I mean, if we did 150 episodes of that, 148 of those was just that I love you, no matter what, unconditionally. So it's, you know, and it was kind of beautiful that that was so consistent through all the, you know, array of people that we have interviewed with different backgrounds and beliefs and all that kind of stuff. That this is like one of the most unifying elements of life on planet Earth is with our children. That's the message. Like, there is nothing that my daughters could do where they would affect my love. You know, that's the one top thing I want, you know.
I disagree. There's a lot of things.
Yeah. Dave has
I have
never
strong
seen eye-to-eye
lines
with me
around
on this.
things that
Yeah.
matter to me.
Yes.
No, I agree, and I think it's a little bit of a lot of things. It's like what John said is absolutely true. It's also that like I am fallible, you know, that like there's always a bridge to me through vulnerability that I try to build, you know, just to lead in a way that's like, I heard a quote one. It's one of those transformative quotes I've ever heard in my life. Whenever we come together sharing our strengths, it breeds competition. Whenever we come together sharing our weaknesses, it breeds community. And I see that, and I want to lead that way. I want them to know, like, hey, nothing's off the table. Like, accuse me as much as you need to. And I know that gets harder as you get older because, and I've already felt this, gosh, my 13-year-old son, like respect is starting to really matter to me with him, which is funny. And that's a new thing for me because, I'm like, whoa, well, it's interesting as these things are changing in my spirit where I'm like, and it matters that he respects me and his friends respect me and, which is kind of a new thing. And so I can see now how, when my dad and I have had some hard conversations where I'm like, man, he's really getting bristled. I'm like, oh, I get now why he gets bristled. Because it's like, that's like a currency to a man. It's like, and you got your kid kind of squaring up and it's like, oh, you want to roll with the old man, huh? Let's do it, But just to know that hopefully as I navigate that too, that there will be this humility and knowing like, hey, I'm very capable of very terrible, mean things. And to know that that's always a conversation that we can have, to John's point. It's just basically another way of saying the same thing, which is like, there's nothing. Your relationship is penultimate to me, and that's what I'll always fight for, no matter what what it looks like, the communication looks like.
Yeah.
There's three of us here who are girl dads, and you have a son.
I've got a girl too,
and a girl.
In the middle.
You have one son?
Yeah, boy, girl, boy.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm curious as to how important it is to you guys. I say every day to my daughter that you are beautiful. And her nickname is Beauty. First thing in the morning, like, you're beautiful. And I'll also ask her, who's beautiful? And she'll go, Emmeline is beautiful. And I kind of, loosely do that because I don't want her looking for that message in the wrong places older. I don't, I'm also worried that she's going to go off to college and realize that she's not the princess of a small country and that people do not actually have to serve her or worship her in any way that's not obligated.
Yeah.
So I'm a little worried that we're heading that direction, and we'll figure out how to manage that later. But I'm wondering, did you guys ever realize that a woman is beautiful and she's a gift, and I almost feel like a woman sensing that she's being adored is like food. I mean, it's I don't want to say expected in an entitled sense, but it's sort of like, a man deserves to be respected. A woman deserves to be adored. And if she doesn't get that from you, she's probably going to try to get it in some way that's not healthy. Did you guys ever have that kind of epiphany and begin to communicate that to your girls?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a weird one because I grew up in a way where that kind of talk wasn't expressed that way. That wasn't a verbalized thing. And I think where I can get trapped in my head is it feels cliche-ish. So I take it off as, well, it's not that important. And one of the things my wife has reminded me of often is I want to feel pursued and adored by you. And I need to hear that. And
can't read your mind.
No, and the way I grew up was I never heard my dad say that much. It was weird. And so having girls, to your point of thinking about, same thing. Like, I want them to know, no matter what anyone says, you're a beautiful girl. Who cares what you look like? You're a beautiful human. We're not going to judge by those standards. And it's a weird muscle I'm exercising because it's not natural to me to say that. It's not natural for me to, because I don't know. I just feel, I'm very personal. Like, if I don't, it's not that I don't mean it, but it's like, it just feels kind of, I'm going through the motions here. I'm just saying the thing you want me to hear. And so really the work I have to do internally is to actually believe it. Does that make sense? Kind of do that wrestling of like, regardless of in the moment, if I'm frustrated with my wife or something like that, is to still remind myself, that's my wife.
Yeah.
That's my wife. That's my daughters.
Yeah.
And that's part of my job as a husband and a dad to communicate
it's
that.
It's part of the provision mandate, I think. And, providing for a family, I think the financial part is the easiest part.
Yeah.
And it's actually the emotional provision that is the challenge. And we, things are cliche because they're fundamental.
Right.
And you got to nail the fundamentals. I'm hoping, I grew up in a home, my mother said, I love you to me for the first time when I was 21 years old.
Holy cow.
Wow.
Yeah. And her mother was insanely tough. I mean, a very, very tough woman. I remember at my grandmother's funeral, she died at 96, the pastor of her church came over to our table at a potluck after the service and said, well, your your mother wasn't a very kind woman. And our whole table was
When
just
the pastor
like,
says that, you're like, whoa.
No, and our whole table was like, well, that's a very diplomatic way of saying that. We appreciate your because she just wasn't. Yeah. And, but
I just want to say I
wrote
respect the potluck at the funeral. It's
very Southern.
I love that.
I grew up in Texas.
That's amazing.
But my grandmother also, I wrote a book called Prayer in the Art of Volkswagen Maintenance. I never told anybody in my family that I'd written the book until it was published. I just showed up on Christmas and had these books, and they were just like, why'd you steal this man's book and put your name on it? You know,
There's
another Don Miller out there?
That's the attitude of my family. My grandmother had that book sandwiched between the cushion in her chair, and it had been read 500 times.
Whoa,
I mean, it was ripped to shreds. She never acknowledged it.
Wow.
Never said, proud of you. It's a generation that had to go through a lot.
Man.
And I mean, you had to be tough to survive.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and my mom kind of learned from that. And by the way, she said, I love you when I was 21 after I said it.
Wow.
I said, Mom, well, you know I love you. And she goes, I love you too. And I remember thinking, wow, I wasn't expecting that. You know?
Wow.
And at the same time, one of the most gracious, tough human beings you can imagine. I wouldn't take, from what my mother gave me in certain terms of toughness and resilience, I would say, no, you can leave the love out. That was actually more important.
Wow.
You know, I needed that. I needed the dad side to be in her as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that is not a knock on my amazing mother.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm wondering about the generation that we're raising, and my prediction actually is they're going to be incredibly healthy. And I think the reason is the stats all show that men are just taking a much more involved approach in their family. And I think part of that is it's part of the provision mandate. You can't see this as just financial. That you bring an emotional stability and a foundation to this family that I think is incredibly important. My mother-in-law was a saint. She passed away a couple of years ago, year and a half ago. And one of the things that she said to me, and she didn't say it in a moment of rebuke. She said it maybe because she just understood my personality. But before Emmeline was born, she said, Don, I want you to know something. Whew. She's not a problem to fix. She's a relationship to build.
Wow, that's good.
Man, it just never left me. I'm like, I'm not going to fix this kid. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I can always build this relationship. Yeah. And I think it took a year for me to actually believe in the vision that my daughter would like me.
Yeah.
You know, when you grow up and you've been bullied or whatever, it's very hard for you to believe that people are. But about a year, and I'm just kind of like, well, how could she not? You know, I tell her that she's beautiful every day. You know, she gets a popsicle and mom's not looking. I mean, there's all sorts of great stuff here.
Pushing strollers up the
gravy
hill.
train
Up the hill.
Up. Keyword up.
Can I say one more thing? And it actually has to do with your book, the Storyline book back in the day, which I loved, and I think I bought 15 from you at one point. But one of the things that book did that Al Andrews also challenged me when we met the first time was this idea that, like, what's the theme of your childhood? Like, he would ask, and this is a really consistent thing in therapy where it's like, there was one thing you heard over and over. What was that thing? And it's a really interesting, for anybody that's listening or watching, it's an interesting exercise. One, just to kind of spend some time around what that thing was. And it can be great. I think probably more it's not great because we tend to remember those things a little better than the great things. But it could be something your mom always said, your dad always said, whatever. But where I'm going with that is I do think it's worth, and y'all posed this question and when you sent this to us earlier, but like, what is the thing you find yourself saying? And it's a fun game to play with your kids to go like, hey, like, because they're going to take sort of a messaging away from your parenting. And I think it's really good to try to have some discipline around thinking about what you tend to say a lot because, you know, like there's going to be some day if your kid's in counseling, and I hope all my kids go to counseling, Lord knows, is, you know, they may go like, hey, what was something that your dad said a lot? And because we still have a chance now with our kids' ages to really be mindful of that and to watch that. And so it was interesting asking my kids what that was. And I don't know if it's good or bad. They were like, I don't really know. And I was kind of like, actually, that's going to play. That's going to play for now. We'll take that. Because I was scared it's going to be like, no, or I don't know, ask your mom, or like, could y'all leave me alone?
Or would you mind changing the channel? Can you hand me the remote and give me a beer?
Yeah.
But to your point, I think there's something really powerful.
The other day, my daughter literally said to me, and you guys will identify with this. She said to me, "Dad, focus and finish."
No,
focus.
because
When we're trying to get the shoes on, when we're trying, I'm like, hey, she's like, the underwear is half on. She's already lost track of what we're trying. Focus and finish.
And she can say it because you guys are the same.
Yeah, same person.
I love that so
focus
much.
and finish.
Dad, focus and finish. You're like, that's right, babe. Okay, there we go.
It's great.
Messages that we deliver as a dad. Well, I want to thank both of you guys for being out there and leading, not just this conversation, but leading as an inspiration to all of us.
Guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's
an honor. Thank you.
You can hear Dave and John's wisdom on Dadville. Also, you guys have put out some new music projects as well.
Yeah.
Look on where's a good place? Just Spotify or go to your website.
it's great.
Both very, very entertaining on Instagram. What's your Instagram handles?
Jon McLaughlin.
And Dave Barnes Music.
There you go.
Great. We'll have those in the show description. You can go check those out.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Why That Worked podcast presented by StoryBrand.ai. If you like the show, follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're enjoying this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment letting us know what you think and what you want the guys to talk about in a future episode. Curious about how StoryBrand.ai can help you create clear, effective messaging? Well, you can try it out right now and create a free customized tagline for your business. Just go to StoryBrand.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.